3 days after I buried my husband, my sister stood in a backyard full of birthday balloons and told everyone her baby belonged to him. She had a champagne glass in one hand, fake tears on her face, and a type tool in the other. She looked at me like she had already won and said Matthias had left half of my $8 million estate to her son because he was his true bloodline. My mother ran to comfort her. My father told me to be reasonable, and my sister's husband stood by the grill, frozen as he learned in front of 30 people that the child he had loved for a year might not be his. I had just buried the man I loved. I had not even finished writing thank you notes for the funeral flowers, and my family was already trying to turn my grief into a property transfer. They expected me to scream. They expected me to collapse. They expected me to defend my dead husband in front of birthday cake and blue streamers. Instead, I took the fake will from my sister's shaking hand, smiled, and said, "Oh, I see." Because Brielle had made one fatal mistake. She chose a dead man, because a dead man cannot demand a paternity test. But she did not know the medical secret Matthias and I had protected for years. My husband could never father a child. Not maybe, not unlikely, never. At 18, cancer treatment saved his life, but destroyed his reproductive system permanently. ZEL, viable sperm count. Total irreversible sterility. So, when my sister called her son my husband's bloodline, I did not hear a confession. I heard felony forgery, probate fraud, extortion, and the opening line of the trap she had just built for herself. By the end of that week, her fake will would be exposed. My father would be arrested in my living room. Her real baby daddy would be bleeding on my rug. And the family that called me a cruel widow would learn that grief had not made me weak. It had made me precise. The sky was a heavy, suffocating gray on the afternoon of my nephew's first birthday party. Matthias had died suddenly of a brain aneurysm exactly 7 days earlier. The funeral had been 3 days ago. I was 34 years old. I was entirely numb. I was trying to navigate the agonizing, hollow reality of a house that had suddenly become far too quiet. I didn't want to attend the party, but my parents, Gareth and Marjorie Sutton, had demanded my presence. They insisted that being around family would help heal my grief. I arrived at my sister's suburban home holding a wrapped present for Asher, completely oblivious to the massive ambush waiting for me. Brielle was 30 years old. She was the undisputed golden child of the Sutton family. Whatever financial ruin she caused, whatever terrible decisions she made, our parents were always there to bail her out, clean up the mess, and rewrite the narrative, so Brielle always looked like the victim. I was the opposite. I was the eldest daughter who had built Marchmont Luxury Staging from the ground up into a massive, highly successful real estate design firm. Because I was successful, my parents viewed my wealth not as an achievement to be proud of, but as an endless, deeply unfair resource they were entitled to harvest for Brielle's benefit. There were 30 people gathered in Brielle's backyard. Neighbors, distant relatives, members of my parents' exclusive country club. Brielle stood near the massive, brightly colored bouncy castle. She was wearing a flawless summer dress. She picked up a crystal champagne flute and tapped it loudly with a silver spoon. The lively chatter in the backyard died down. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate Asher's first birthday," Brielle announced, her voice adopting a soft, theatrical tremble. "But today is also a deeply painful day for our family, because Asher's father is not here to see it." A wave of intense, uncomfortable confusion rippled through the guests. Everyone turned to look at Terrence Lowe, Brielle's incredibly hardworking, devoted husband. Terrence was standing near the barbecue grill, wearing an apron, a plate of burgers in his hands. He froze entirely. He stared at his wife, completely paralyzed by the sudden highly public declaration. Brielle ignored her husband. She turned directly toward me. She let a single, perfectly timed tear slide down her cheek. "Matthias and I loved each other, Helena," Brielle said loudly, ensuring every single person in the backyard heard her. "We tried to fight it, but we couldn't. Asher is his son." The silence in the backyard was absolute, suffocating, and incredibly heavy. "And Matthias wanted to do the right thing before he died," Brielle continued, pulling a folded piece of paper from her pocket. He gave this to me 2 months ago. It is his last will and testament. He explicitly left exactly half of the Glassmere estate to Asher, to ensure his only true bloodline was permanently provided for. Glassmere Estate was the magnificent, $8 million modern mansion I lived in. I had poured years of sweat, design expertise, and massive corporate capital into acquiring and staging it. And my sister, standing in a yard full of balloons, was aggressively trying to steal it by weaponizing my dead husband's reputation. I looked at my mother. Marjorie rushed forward, wrapping her arms protectively around Brielle. She didn't look at me with sympathy. She looked at me with cold defiance. "We need to honor his dying wishes, Helena," my mother said loudly. I looked at my father. Gareth Sutton stepped toward me, adopting the stern, authoritarian tone he always used when he expected me to surrender my resources to my sister. "Don't cause a scene, Helena," my father warned quietly. "Be reasonable. The boy needs a future. You have more than enough money to share the estate." They weren't surprised by the announcement. They had known. They were entirely complicit in the massive ambush. They were actively helping her use my devastating grief as leverage for a multi-million-dollar property transfer. I looked at Terrence. The plate of burgers had slipped from his hands, crashing onto the concrete patio. He was staring at Brielle, his entire world shattering in front of 30 country club strangers. I did not scream. I did not collapse onto the grass. I did not desperately defend the honor of the incredibly loyal man I had just buried. I walked calmly across the patio. I took the typed, folded paper from Brielle's shaking hand. I scanned the document. The formatting was cheap. The legal jargon was incredibly clumsy. And the signature at the bottom was a crude, slightly blurry copy of Matthias's handwriting. "Oh, I see," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I didn't tear the paper up. I neatly folded it and slipped it into my designer handbag. "Enjoy the party, Brielle," I said quietly. I turned to my parents. "If any of you ever set foot on my property again," I stated, my tone absolute and terrifyingly calm, "I will have you arrested for criminal trespassing." I turned my back on the stunned crowd and walked out of the yard. My silence was a tactical choice. If I had screamed, if I had publicly revealed Matthias's medical secret right then and there, Brielle would have simply claimed she had been manipulated, withdrawn the fake will, and played the victim. She would have escaped any real consequences. I didn't want to embarrass her at a birthday party. I wanted her in a federal prison. Within 48 hours, the brutal smear campaign officially began. Because I had not publicly disputed her claim at the party, Brielle aggressively escalated her narrative. She posted a highly produced, tear-filled video to her massive social media following. She sat in Asher's beautifully decorated nursery, clutching a framed photo of Matthias. "I never wanted to hurt my sister," Brielle wept to the camera. "But Helena is refusing to acknowledge Asher. She is a cruel, heartless widow who would rather see her dead husband's only biological child live in poverty than share her massive, empty mansion." The video went viral within hours. The internet loves a wealthy villain, and my parents ensured I was painted as the ultimate greedy monster. They launched a GoFundMe campaign titled, "Help Asher Claim His Father's Legacy." The campaign description detailed a massive, entirely fabricated legal battle, claiming they desperately needed funds to hire high-powered probate attorneys to fight the greedy widow and secure Asher's rightful $8 million inheritance. Within 3 days, strangers on the internet, fueled by righteous outrage, and my parents' aggressive country club networking, had donated over $40,000 to the fraudulent campaign. The online mob quickly spilled into the real world. A group of angry, misinformed strangers showed up outside the downtown offices of Marchmont Luxury Staging. They carried handmade signs calling me a cruel, barren widow who was hoarding a child's rightful inheritance. The presence of protesters outside my high-end staging firm immediately triggered panic among my elite clients. Wealthy developers and high-profile real estate brokers hate scandal. My office phone began ringing constantly, with clients threatening to pull their massive staging contracts if the messy family drama wasn't quickly resolved. Then, the legal attack officially commenced. I was sitting in my office when a process server walked through the glass doors and handed me a thick stack of legal documents. Brielle had hired Vale and Rusk Probate Litigation, a famously aggressive, incredibly hostile law firm known for strong-arming vulnerable widows into quick, quiet settlements. Brielle had officially filed the forged will in probate court. Worse, her lawyers had successfully secured an emergency temporary injunction. My personal bank accounts were instantly frozen. A temporary legal lien was placed on Glassmere estate, preventing me from selling, transferring, or leveraging the property. They were aggressively attempting to financially starve me into submission. 10 minutes after the process server left, my cell phone rang. It was Gareth. I answered, immediately pressing the record button on my secure office phone system. "Have you seen the injunction, Helena?" my father asked, his voice dripping with arrogant, completely unearned superiority. "Your accounts are locked. Your clients are panicking. You are losing everything." "What do you want, Dad?" I asked, my voice flat. "I want you to be reasonable for once in your selfish life," Gareth sneered. "Sign the quitclaim deed transferring 50% of the estate to Brielle's trust. If you sign the deed today, Brielle drops the probate claim. We call off the protesters, and your business survives. If you fight us, we will drag this out in court for years, until your entire staging company is completely bankrupt." He thought he was being a ruthless, brilliant negotiator. He didn't realize he had just explicitly delivered a massive, undeniable felony extortion threat directly onto a recorded line. "I need time to think about it," I replied, forcing my voice to sound genuinely terrified and completely overwhelmed. "My accounts are frozen. I'm scared." "You have 24 hours, Helena," Gareth snapped. "Don't make me destroy you." He hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I saved the audio file to 3 separate encrypted servers. They thought they were completely winning. They thought the frozen accounts and the online mobs had successfully broken me. They had no idea that the real destruction was about to arrive on my doorstep in the middle of a torrential rainstorm. It was exactly 2 a.m. when the heavy iron gates at the entrance of Glassmere estate buzzed loudly. I was sitting in my dark living room, staring at the rain lashing against the massive floor-to-ceiling windows. I checked the security camera feed on my tablet. Terrence Lowe was standing in the pouring rain, holding a damp canvas duffel bag. I buzzed him in. When I opened the massive mahogany front door, Terrence didn't look angry. He looked entirely shattered. He was a 32-year-old restaurant manager who worked 60 to 80 hours a week just to provide the lifestyle Brielle constantly demanded. He had loved Asher with his entire heart, and his wife had just publicly declared that his son belonged to a dead man. "I'm sorry to come so late, Helena," Terrence said, his voice raw and exhausted, stepping into the massive marble foyer. "She locked me out of the house. She said I was being unsupportive." I handed him a towel. "Come into the kitchen, Terrence." We sat at the massive kitchen island. Terrence unzipped his duffel bag. He didn't pull out clothes. He pulled out a thick stack of printed papers. "Brielle is incredibly arrogant," Terrence said quietly, sliding the papers across the marble counter. "She deleted her text messages, but she didn't realize they stay in the recently deleted folder on iCloud for 30 days. I synced her account to my iPad before I left the house." I picked up the printed papers. It was a complete, unredacted transcript of text messages between Brielle and my mother, Marjorie. The messages weren't just evidence of an affair. They were the undeniable blueprint of a massive financial fraud. "Brielle, Matthias is dead. This is the absolute perfect opportunity. I need that house, Mom." "Marjorie, are you sure about this, Brielle? What if Helena demands a paternity test on the baby?" "Brielle, that's the beauty of it. Matthias is a corpse. A dead man cannot request a paternity test. I will completely refuse to provide Asher's DNA to Helena, claiming I need to protect my baby from the trauma of her cruel denial. By the time a judge actually orders a test months from now, she will have already signed the settlement to save her staging business from the probate freeze." I stared at the pages. Brielle had explicitly chosen my dead husband, not because they were secretly in love, but because a dead man was the ultimate defenseless target. She used him, Terrence whispered, his voice cracking with immense pain. She used a dead teacher because she thought his corpse would be her absolute perfect shield. She is trying to stall the DNA test to force a quick financial settlement, I noted, my analytical mind entirely focused on the mechanics of the trap. Terrence looked at me. His eyes were hard, resolute, and completely devoid of the blind devotion he had once shown his wife. She can't stall the DNA test, Helena, Terrence stated firmly. Because I already took a cheek swab from Asher yesterday morning. I sent it to an expedited private lab, and I registered the profile with a premium ancestry database. My eyes widened. Terrence wasn't just a heartbroken victim. He was actively dismantling her timeline. I need to show you something, Terrence, I said quietly. I walked into my home office and opened the heavy steel wall safe hidden behind a massive painting. I pulled out a thick black medical folder. I returned to the kitchen and placed the certified medical records on the counter. Brielle's entire plan relies on the biological possibility that Matthias is Asher's father, I explained softly, opening the folder. But she didn't know the secret Matthias and I protected for 10 years to avoid my parents' incredibly toxic judgment. Terrence looked at the medical records. When Matthias was 18, he underwent intense, brutal chemotherapy and radiation to survive a highly aggressive cancer, I stated, the memory of his past pain still echoing in my chest. The treatment saved his life, but it resulted in 0 viable sperm count. Total, irreversible sterility. Terrence stared at the medical conclusion, the absolute impossibility of Brielle's claim, staring back at him in black and white ink. He could never have children, Terrence whispered, realization dawning completely. It's biologically impossible. Yes, I confirmed. Terrence let out a shaky breath, the massive weight of his wife's horrific deception finally collapsing completely. We don't reveal this yet, Terrence said, his voice suddenly sharp with cold, calculating strategy. If we reveal the medical records or the DNA now, they will just claim it was a desperate mistake, drop the probate suit, and try to walk away. They need to commit. I agree. I nodded. We let them commit felony fraud. We let them commit extortion. We let them build a trap so massive they can never possibly escape it. The Midnight Alliance was officially forged. The next morning, I took the forged will and the extortion recording to my corporate attorney, Rosalind Keene. Rosalind wasn't a family law attorney. She was a ruthless, brilliant corporate litigator who specialized in hostile takeovers and massive real estate contracts. She sat behind her massive mahogany desk, reviewing the cheap, poorly formatted typed will Brielle had submitted to the probate court. This is incredibly clumsy, Rosalind noted, adjusting her glasses. The formatting actually contradicts basic state jurisdiction laws. She called in her firm's elite digital forensic specialist, Felix Armand. Felix took the digital PDF of the will that Brielle's aggressive lawyers had filed with the court and rapidly deconstructed the metadata. The signature wasn't signed directly on this document, Felix announced within 20 minutes, projecting the digital analysis onto the wall monitor. It was digitally cropped, resized, and inserted onto the PDF line. I stared at the signature on the screen. There was a slight, incredibly faint hesitation mark on the tail of the M. I know exactly where she stole that signature, I said quietly, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. I pulled out my phone and quickly scrolled through my archived digital files until I found it. I cast the image to the screen next to the forged will. It was a high-resolution scan of a family's Christmas card Matthias had signed for my parents 4 years ago. The signatures were an absolute, undeniable 1-1 match. Brielle had literally cropped a Christmas greeting to forge a multi-million-dollar federal legal document. Well, Rosalind smiled, a cold, dangerous expression that officially elevates this from a messy family dispute to felony forgery, perjury, and attempted grand financial fraud. Can we dismiss the probate injunction now? I asked. We don't even need the forgery evidence to dismiss the injunction, Helena, Rosalind revealed, leaning back in her leather chair. Brielle's aggressive probate lawyers made a massive, fundamental jurisdictional error. She pulled up the official property deed for Glassmere estate. Your parents and your sister assume that because you and Matthias lived in the mansion, it was a marital asset subject to probate claims, Rosalind explained. But Glassmere Estate does not belong to you or Matthias personally. It is entirely owned by Marchmont Luxury Staging as a flagship corporate showcase property. I smiled. The massive corporate shield I had built years ago was holding perfectly. The probate court has absolutely zero jurisdiction over a corporate asset, Rosalind concluded triumphantly. Brielle's lawyers placed a lien on a house that the deceased man never legally owned. Don't file the dismissal yet, Rosalind, I instructed, my voice entirely calm. Leave the injunction in place. Let them think they have successfully frozen my life. I want them at the absolute height of their arrogance when I destroy them. 3 days later, Terrence called me. The DNA results are back, Terrence said, his voice heavy with the crushing reality of the truth. The probability of paternity is 0%. I am not Asher's father. My heart broke for the hardworking man who had loved a child that wasn't his. But the premium ancestry database flagged a massive familial match. Terrence continued, the grief in his voice shifting rapidly into intense, burning anger. It matched Asher's DNA profile to a prominent local family tree. He paused, letting the devastating revelation hang in the air. The biological father isn't a random stranger, Helena, Terrence revealed. The closest genetic match leads directly to Blaise Carrington. I froze completely. Blaise Carrington wasn't just a multimillionaire commercial real estate developer. He was my father's absolute best friend. They were Sunday golf partners. Our families had spent decades attending the same exclusive country club events. Blaise had been married to his elegant, highly respected wife, Celeste, for 30 years. Brielle hadn't just had a random affair. She had slept with a married millionaire who was old enough to be her father, and who was the primary financial backer for several of Gareth's struggling business ventures. When Blaise inevitably cut her off and refused to leave his wealthy wife, Brielle used Terrence as a safety net. And when Matthias died, she used his corpse as the perfect, defenseless scapegoat to hide the explosive truth from our father. The trap was finally fully armed. I picked up my phone and opened the toxic family group chat. I didn't argue. I didn't defend Matthias. I typed the exact message they were desperately waiting to receive. Helena, the frozen accounts are destroying my staging business. I can't fight this anymore. I'm exhausted. I am ready to surrender and sign the settlement deed. The response from my father was almost instantaneous. Gareth, finally, you are making the right choice for the family, Helena. Helena, I will host a formal mediation dinner at Glassmere Estate tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Bring the final settlement papers and the quitclaim deed. We will sign everything together. I knew exactly how my parents operated. They wouldn't want a quiet, private victory. They would want to gloat. They would want an audience to witness the total humiliation and surrender of the daughter they had always resented. Marjorie, we will be there. And I am bringing a few close friends from the country club to serve as impartial witnesses to the signing, just to ensure you don't try any last-minute legal tricks. I smiled at the glowing screen. Helena, bring whoever you want. Mother I immediately texted Terrence. Helena, the dinner is tomorrow at 7. My mother is bringing witnesses. Make sure you are in the driveway by 7:15. It was time to end the narrative they had built on my husband's grave. The massive crystal chandelier in the formal dining room of Glassmere Estate cast a warm, elegant glow over the long mahogany table. At 7 p.m. exactly, the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find my entire toxic family standing on my front porch, completely surrounded by their carefully selected audience of high society witnesses. Gareth and Marjorie Sutton walked in first, projecting an aura of immense, victorious parental authority. Brielle followed closely behind them, wearing a modest, dark cocktail dress designed to make her look like a sympathetic, grieving mother fighting for her child's future. She was clutching a thick legal folder, the settlement papers. Behind them were 4 elite members of my parents' country club, invited specifically to witness my total humiliation. And right in the center of the witness group stood Blaise Carrington, the multi-millionaire real estate developer, and his elegant, fiercely intelligent wife of 30 years, Celeste. "Welcome," I said smoothly, gesturing toward the dining room. I had meticulously orchestrated the seating arrangement. I placed Brielle near the head of the table. I placed Blaise Carrington directly across from her, ensuring they were in constant, uncomfortable visual contact. As everyone took their seats, Gareth stood up. He loved an audience, and he was eager to play the role of the benevolent patriarch who had successfully resolved a messy family dispute. "I want to thank everyone for coming tonight," Gareth announced, resting his hand proudly on Brielle's shoulder. "This has been an incredibly painful time for our family. But tonight, Helena has finally chosen forgiveness. She has chosen to do the right thing for her sister, and for her late husband's only child." The country club witnesses murmured their approval, looking at me with patronizing sympathy. Brielle smiled a perfectly rehearsed, tearful smile. She slid the thick legal folder across the polished mahogany table toward me. "Here is the quitclaim deed, Helena," Brielle said softly, playing her role perfectly for the witnesses. "Once you sign over the 50% share of the estate, my lawyers will officially drop the probate injunction. Your bank accounts will be unfrozen in the morning." I didn't pick up the pen. I picked up a small remote control resting beside my water glass. "Before I sign over half of my $8 million estate," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the quiet dining room, "I want to share a brief medical presentation regarding my late husband's health." I pressed the button on the remote. The massive flat-screen television, mounted on the far wall of the dining room, immediately powered on. It didn't display a family photo. It displayed a highly magnified, certified medical diagnostic report from one of the top oncology centers in the country. The official hospital seals and physician signatures were entirely visible on the screen. The dining room went completely, suffocatingly silent. "When Matthias was 18 years old," I stated calmly, reading directly from the highlighted text on the screen, "he underwent a brutal, highly aggressive regimen of chemotherapy and radiation to survive stage 4 lymphoma." Gareth frowned, confused by the sudden medical pivot. "What does this have to do with the estate, Helena?" "Everything, Dad," I replied coldly. I clicked the remote again. The screen zoomed in on the final, devastating medical conclusion at the bottom of the report. "The treatment saved his life," I explained, my voice echoing in the massive room. "But it destroyed his reproductive system. 0 viable sperm count. Total irreversible sterility." Brielle's face went completely, horrifyingly pale. The smug, victorious smile vanished entirely, replaced by sheer, unadulterated panic. "That's a lie," Brielle shrieked desperately, standing up from the table. "You forged that document to steal Asher's inheritance." "I didn't forge it, Brielle," I replied smoothly. "The chief oncologist who signed that report is currently on standby to testify in federal court if necessary." I leaned forward, resting my hands on the mahogany table. I looked directly into my sister's terrified eyes. "So, Brielle," I asked, the trap officially springing shut, "I need you to explain something to all of our guests. How exactly did you get pregnant by a man who was entirely biologically incapable of producing children?" The country club witnesses gasped loudly. The narrative they had been sold by my parents completely shattered in an instant. Marjorie looked frantically at her golden child. "Brielle? What is she talking about?" Before Brielle could formulate another desperate lie, the heavy dining room doors swung open. Terrence Lowe walked into the room. He was not wearing his restaurant uniform. He was wearing a sharp, tailored black suit. He was completely soaked from the rain outside. But he looked more powerful and resolute than he had ever looked in his entire life. He carried a thick black binder. "She didn't get pregnant by Matthias," Terrence announced, his voice vibrating with intense, barely contained fury. Terrence walked directly to the table and dropped a certified laboratory report onto the polished wood, right in front of my father. "I took a DNA swab from Asher," Terrence stated clearly. "The probability of paternity is 0%. I am not the father, and Matthias is not the father." The devastating revelation hung heavily over the luxurious dining room. Brielle began to hyperventilate, desperately looking for an exit. Gareth stared at the DNA report in absolute horror. The golden child he had relentlessly protected, the daughter he had helped extort me for, was completely exposed as a massive, manipulative fraud. Then who is the father, Brielle? Gareth demanded, his voice shaking with furious confusion. Who did you sleep with? Terrence didn't let Brielle answer. He turned slowly and looked directly across the table at the multi-millionaire real estate developer sitting frozen in his chair. Why don't you ask your best friend, Gareth? Terrence suggested coldly. Every single person in the room turned to look at Blaze Carrington. Blaze was entirely paralyzed. The powerful, wealthy developer looked like a terrified animal caught in a snare. Celeste Carrington, his elegant, high-society wife of 30 years, slowly turned her head to look at her husband. She didn't scream. Blaze, Celeste said, her voice dropping to a terrifying absolute zero. Tell me this man is lying. Blaze opened his mouth, but no words came out. The sheer, overwhelming shame and terror radiating from his body was an undeniable confession. He couldn't look at his wife. He couldn't look at his best friend. Celeste didn't wait for a verbal confirmation. She stood up from her chair, pulled her arm back, and slapped Blaze across the face with such immense force that the sound echoed like a gunshot through the silent dining room. The wealthy witnesses erupted into absolute chaos. Gareth let out a primal roar of sheer fury. The realization that his best friend, his Sunday golf partner, had slept with his daughter and fathered the child that had just destroyed his family completely broke his sanity. Gareth lunged across the table, grabbing Blaze by the collar of his expensive suit, throwing a wild, desperate punch that connected heavily with the developer's jaw. "You bastard!" Gareth screamed, tackling his former friend to the floor. Terrence stepped back, completely refusing to intervene as the two older men brawled violently on the expensive Persian rug. Brielle fell to her knees, weeping hysterically, her expensive cocktail dress ruined. She looked desperately at Terrence, then at me. "Please, Helena, please!" Brielle begged, crawling slightly toward my chair. "I'm sorry. I just wanted the house. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. Please don't call the police." I looked down at the sister who had tried to steal my home and destroy my dead husband's honor. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out a small, black corporate binder. I tossed it onto the table next to the fake will. "You didn't just hurt people, Brielle," I stated coldly, rising from my chair. "You committed felony crimes. You forged a federal legal document. You committed massive financial wire fraud with your fake GoFundMe campaign. And you attempted to steal a corporate asset." I pointed to the black binder. "Glassmere estate does not belong to me or Matthias," I revealed, delivering the final, devastating legal blow. "It belongs entirely to Marchmont Luxury Staging. You filed a fraudulent probate claim against a multi-million-dollar corporate entity." I turned to my father, who was panting heavily, standing over the bleeding, humiliated form of Blaze Carrington. "And you, Dad," I added, my voice devoid of any mercy. "You explicitly threatened to sabotage my corporate contracts if I didn't sign over the house." I recorded the entire 14-minute phone call. It is a textbook case of felony corporate extortion. Gareth froze, the absolute magnitude of the legal trap finally crushing the last of his arrogant defiance. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling glass windows of the dining room, the heavy darkness of the rainy night was suddenly pierced by brilliant, flashing red and blue lights. 3 police cruisers sped up the long, winding driveway of Glassmere Estate, completely surrounding the front entrance. "I didn't need to call the police tonight, Brielle," I said quietly, watching the officers approach the front door, "because I delivered the complete dossier of evidence, the forged will, the GoFundMe records, and the extortion tape to the district attorney's office 3 days ago. They secured the arrest warrants this morning." The heavy front doors burst open. A team of police detectives and uniformed officers marched into the chaotic dining room. "Brielle Sutton and Gareth Sutton," the lead detective announced, his voice booming with absolute, terrifying authority. "You are under arrest for felony forgery, attempted grand financial fraud, perjury, and corporate extortion." Marjorie Sutton collapsed onto the dining room chair, sobbing uncontrollably. She watched in absolute, helpless horror as the police officers aggressively pulled her golden child's arms behind her back and locked the cold steel handcuffs tightly around her wrists. Gareth didn't fight. He offered his wrists to the officers, completely broken, his reputation and his freedom entirely destroyed. As the police dragged my sister and my father out of my house in front of the horrified elite witnesses, I walked over to the front door. I looked at Marjorie, Blaze, and the rest of the toxic audience. "Get out of my house," I ordered coldly. "All of you." The destruction of my toxic family was absolute and entirely self-inflicted. Because the digital forensic evidence and the recorded extortion tape were completely undeniable, Brielle never saw the inside of a glamorous courtroom. There was no highly publicized, dramatic trial where she could play the victim. Facing a devastating mountain of felony charges, Brielle accepted a brutal plea deal. She was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for massive wire fraud, forgery, and perjury. The GoFundMe campaign she had used to scam thousands of sympathetic strangers became the final nail in her public coffin. When the truth broke that she had used a dead high school teacher and her own infant son to fund a fake legal battle, the internet mob that had once protested outside my office violently turned against her. She wasn't remembered as a grieving mother. She was permanently branded as a ruthless, manipulative scammer. My father's collapse was equally catastrophic. Gareth Sutton lost everything he had spent his entire life trying to protect. Following the explosive, highly public confrontation in my dining room, Celeste Carrington immediately filed for a brutal, aggressive divorce from Blaze. She was an incredibly intelligent, powerful woman who refused to let her husband's disgusting betrayal humiliate her. She systematically dismantled his massive real estate empire during the divorce proceedings, successfully claiming the vast majority of his assets. Desperate to hide whatever capital he had left from Celeste's relentless divorce attorneys, Blaze aggressively pulled all of his financial backing out of my father's struggling business ventures. Without Blaze's massive financial shield, Gareth's fragile empire collapsed within 30 days. He was forced to file for total bankruptcy. The bank foreclosed on the Sutton family estate. The luxury cars were repossessed. The exclusive country club, horrified by the massive scandal and the criminal arrests, permanently revoked both Gareth and Marjorie's memberships. My parents were entirely ostracized from the high society they had worshipped. They were forced to move into a small, cramped apartment on the outskirts of the city, drowning in massive legal debt and the bitter realization that their relentless protection of their golden child had ultimately destroyed them. Terrence Lowe, however, fought brilliantly. He did not let the betrayal destroy his core integrity. He filed for divorce immediately, aggressively presenting the massive fraud evidence in family court. He successfully secured total protection of his personal finances, completely freezing Brielle out of any joint marital assets. But Terrence's most profoundly honorable victory was regarding Asher. He didn't abandon the child. He knew that if he walked away, Asher would inevitably become a pawn in Brielle's endless cycle of manipulation once she was released from prison, or worse, end up in the custody of Gareth and Marjorie. Terrence hired a ruthless family attorney. He fought for and successfully secured partial legal guardianship of Asher. He established an ironclad trust fund for the boy, hired a dedicated nanny, and ensured that Asher would be raised in a stable, honest environment, completely shielded from the toxic, manipulative rot of the Sutton family. He lost the lie of his marriage, but he absolutely refused to punish an innocent child for the sins of the mother. 1 month after the catastrophic mediation dinner, the heavy rain had finally stopped. The massive, modern halls of Glassmere estate were completely quiet again. The probate injunction had been officially dismissed. My personal bank accounts were entirely unfrozen, and Marchmont Luxury Staging had secured 3 massive new corporate contracts from elite developers who respected how ruthlessly and flawlessly I had defended my business. Terrence drove up to the mansion late on a Sunday evening. We didn't sit in the formal dining room. We sat at the massive marble kitchen island. I poured 2 glasses of expensive champagne. We didn't talk about Brielle. We didn't talk about my parents or the massive legal fallout. We raised our glasses in the quiet, peaceful kitchen. To Matthias, Terrence said softly, his voice full of genuine, profound respect for the incredibly honorable man he had barely known. To Matthias, I echoed, the sharp, agonizing edge of my grief finally beginning to soften into a warm, deeply cherished memory. We drank the champagne in silence. Later that night, I stood alone on the expansive balcony of the master suite, looking out over the dark, sprawling grounds of Glassmere estate. Looking back, the destruction of Brielle's massive fraud was incredibly simple. She fell because she believed she was the smartest person in the room. She thought Matthias was the perfect, ultimate target. She chose a dead man because she genuinely believed a corpse could not demand a paternity test, and therefore could not defend himself. She completely forgot that certified medical records can speak far louder than ghosts. My parents made an equally fatal miscalculation. They didn't just lose me because they loved my sister more than they loved me. They didn't lose me because they were heavily biased or blinded by toxic familial loyalty. They lost me because they actively, enthusiastically helped her steal from me. They participated in the extortion. They weaponized the legal system. They drove the online mob to my office doors. They wanted a legacy built entirely on my ruin. So, I simply stepped aside and allowed federal law to aggressively collect the bricks. And they all fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the house they were trying to steal. They looked at Glassmere Estate and saw a massive $8 million prize. They saw a luxury asset they could liquidate to fund their extravagant lifestyles. They didn't realize that the mansion wasn't just a house. It was a corporate fortress. It was a legal shield I had meticulously built and heavily fortified long before Matthias ever got sick. It was the absolute undeniable proof that I was never the weak, easily manipulated daughter they had always assumed I was. They came to my house expecting a complete surrender. They left in cold steel handcuffs. My family always called me a cold, calculating, incredibly selfish woman because I refused to set myself on fire just to keep them warm. They believed that because I didn't scream, cry, or engage in their endless, toxic emotional drama, I was somehow an easy target to be bullied and discarded. But I am a luxury stager. I understand how to set a scene. I understand how to meticulously arrange every single piece of furniture, every lighting fixture, and every visual element to create an absolutely flawless, undeniable narrative. I didn't fight them with tears. I fought them with certified medical impossibilities, flawless digital forensics, and incredibly precise legal execution. I successfully protected my business. I secured my home. But most importantly, I successfully defended the absolute honor and the pristine legacy of the incredibly kind, deeply loving man who had shared his life with me. My husband could not defend himself from the grave, but I could. And in the end, I kept my house, I kept my peace, and I finally secured my complete, absolute freedom from the toxic bloodline that had tried to destroy me. Thank you for listening to my story. If this story gave you something to think about, please leave a comment and subscribe so you don't miss the stories to come.